Unfortunately, I begin tonight's discussion on a very sad note. This is 1-year-old Cohen Wiley. He was killed by police. I'm going to read this statement from the African American Policy Forum. A 1-year-old baby, full of joy, wonder, and promise. A 1-year-old baby who was a whole world and a whole life to live, who had a whole world and a whole life to live. Cohen Wiley should be alive today. Reaching for his mom, pulling himself up on the furniture, finding his words. Instead, he was killed by the state as an officer fired into a car where his mother was trying to signal that a baby was present. We cannot become inured to this violence. We cannot allow Cohen's memory to be erased. There is no justice in a world where a 1-year-old baby can be skipping with his mom in one moment and gone the next. But we will not lose sight of advocating for the changes we need, so not one other baby is stolen from us. For those of you who have not heard this awful story, Cohen was killed when a police officer fired into the car he was in with his mom and another woman. They reportedly stole diapers, although that's not concretely true, and were in the car driving away when the officers fired a gun, knowing there was a child in the car. Cohen died and another woman was injured. Now, if you're wondering why I'm talking about this tragic loss of life, when I promised a discussion on celebrating and affirming diversity as a vital asset in the lives of young children, well, it's because Cohen is dead because he is Black. And it's not up for debate. Because in America, if a white mother is accused of stealing diapers, police don't fire a gun into her car and kill her white child. This only happens to Black and brown children, Black and brown women and mothers, Black and brown men and fathers. And staring at this beautiful face as I am racked with grief at the unmanageable loss his family is experiencing, I am reminded why this value is so important. Because if you value and celebrate diversity, you don't kill 1-year-old Black children, no matter what their grown-up did or might have done. Our inability to value all lives, especially Black and brown and immigrant lives, is how we ended up with a 1-year-old child shot dead by police. So I want to start by centering just how important this value is, not just for you as an early childhood educator, but for every child who you will teach, who will grow up and learn to celebrate and affirm diversity and not to be threatened by Black moms and their babies. Now let's have a moment of silence for Cohen Wiley and his family. Welcome back. I'm Dr. Janisha Jones. I am a scholar activist, a teacher educator, and a true play advocate, and a creator of a community I call Free to Teach equals Liberated to Learn, where in week 7 of Embracing Early Childhood Values as Resistance, our Wednesday Night Live series, where we dig into 10 early childhood education and care professional values that should be guiding our work with young children and use a 4-step framework to turn those values into active resistance. And I want to offer a special welcome tonight to the, because we're live streaming on the Defending the Early Years Facebook page. Tonight's value is grounded in the framework DEY published last year that I wrote. It's called Fostering Healthy Identity in Young Children, affirming race, identity, and culture in the early years. I'm going to add a pink QR code to the top of the screen. There it is. And you can scan that and go to our page where you can access the framework for free on the Defending the Early Years website. If you're joining us for the first time, this series is rooted in a special issue of the Global Education Review that I co-edited with Helge Wasmuth. Now it's titled Navigating an Uncertain Future by Embracing Early Childhood Education Care Values. Now I'm going to add a blue QR code, and you can scan that to find the first issue that was published earlier this year. So each week we take one of these values, unpack it, and walk through a 4-step framework together. And so that framework begins with name it, audit it, frame it, and advocate for it. If you missed last week's session on Centering Care is Foundational, now you can scan the red QR code on your screen to access it at the recording on my YouTube page. All right, so we're going to get into tonight's value, which is going to pop up on your screen here. It's celebrating and affirming diversity as a vital asset in the lives of young children. As I mentioned, this value is rooted in the framework we published last year. I created this framework to support early childhood educators and caregivers in accepting the responsibility for young children's identity development and embracing the opportunity to ensure they develop a healthy identity. Before you can accept this responsibility, you need to understand how children's racial identity develops and how you can ensure that development is healthy and positive. Like many of you, I earned my bachelor's degree, Go University of the District of Columbia, in early childhood education. And though I took a course on diversity, I never really learned about racial identity development. When I read the book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum, that was the first time that I was introduced to the concept of racial identity development. And it makes sense, given that Dr. Tatum is a psychologist and racial identity development is primarily situated within the field of psychology. But it's still important in education, especially in early childhood education, yet it is rarely addressed. In an interview with educator Takima Bunch-Smith for a chapter in the book I co-edited, Black Lives Matter at School, An Uprising for Educational Justice, she said, a substantial part of the socializing piece of early childhood education is to speak objectively to what all children need, such as all children need care and relationships. But nobody would say what it means to be understood culturally and what impact race and racism have on the field of early education. So I love that quote and love working with Takima. So this is one of the many reasons I created this framework based on what we know about how children learn about race, racism, culture, and ethnicity, and how identity development begins in the early years. We must accept the responsibility to foster healthy identity in our early childhood classrooms and environments. Another reason I created this framework is because of the pervasiveness of racial inferiority that is a byproduct of living in a racist society. In the 1950s, Black psychologist couple, Mamie and Phillips Clark, engineered the doll test, documenting how racial segregation and discrimination led to racial inferiority in Black children. The results of that landmark study were used to desegregate schools across the country. Unfortunately, racial inferiority is still present, and it shows up in the lack of representation for Black and Indigenous and children of color. I created this image to highlight the importance of representation for young children. I had never seen a cartoon image with a Black girl that looked like me when I was growing up. And I noted in my comment how desperately young me needed that representation. So that's 7-year-old me, and that's the image that I saw recently. And so I think it's important that we recognize that representation matters. It matters for lots of children of color who are being socialized to not see themselves as fully human and fully welcomed in this world. And though we've made some strides in representation in children's books and literature, it's still not enough. So I included this image in the framework because though it shows, right, it shows that the difference in diversity in children's books between 2015 and 2018. And people think, oh, look, great, there's progress. But if you look closely between the 3 years, there was a decrease in books that featured solely white characters. And there were slight increases in the characters of color, but the biggest increase came into non-human characters, right? So even in 3 years, if there was a push for more diversity in children's books, we've seen some gains, but it's still not enough. And so it's important to remember that we want representation. Children need to see themselves in the curriculum, in the materials, on the posters, everywhere. They need to see kids who don't look like them so that they can learn to support and affirm them as well. And if you don't think representation matters, then let me introduce you to the story of Ariana. If I can get this, oh, there it is. Okay, if I get this image on the screen, there we go. All right, so in 2024, her story went viral. She was being filmed getting her hair done. And at one point, she looked at her reflection in the phone camera and she just said, "I'm so ugly." And the person doing her hair immediately pushed back against that assertion and kind of held her really close in the arms as she cried. Now, as I saw this video, I was triggered for lots of reasons, but I read through the comments and I realized that many people believe that someone must have told her she was ugly for her to say something like that. And I realized that these people did not understand how racial socialization and identity development work. Because I too believed I was ugly at her age. And no one ever told me I was ugly. Well, maybe my brother, but that was just him being my brother, right? But I believed it because the racial socialization I received taught me that only people with white skin were beautiful. And since I didn't have white skin, I must be ugly. I never expressed this belief to others, but I believed it anyway for a long time. And no one had to call me ugly for me to believe it. This is how racial inferiority operates. It makes little Black girls believe they are ugly because they do not look like the European standard of beauty, which is everywhere, right? Well, fortunately, this girl's story had a happy ending. Black artists who showed up for her by showering her with images. These are just two of the images I saw. Herself with a beautiful Black child, and the person who was doing her hair, the hairdresser, that was her in the image there, shared another video of the little girl saying she was beautiful. And so I wish all Black girls had this happy ending, but we know that many won't. Many will have to wait until they're adults, like I was, to undo the years of racial socialization and develop a healthy racial identity. But what if you could help them shed that unhealthy socialization in the early years? I believe you can. And I created this framework to support you. Despite the fact that there is a vocal minority of people working overtime to undo the progress we've made towards racial justice, we must not give in and let them win. We must not allow the misguided attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion to deter us from our responsibility to support whole child development. Identity development is a part of child development, which means early childhood educators and caregivers have a responsibility to learn how to support healthy identity development. And this framework was created to help you meet this responsibility. So I'm going to add the widget up there again so you can scan for the framework. I lost track of how many times I've heard someone say children are too young to talk about race. I include this image in the framework as well too, because we can no longer hold on to this misconception that children are too young for this vital work. And instead, we must recognize how racial identity development can be healthy and unhealthy, and accept our role in ensuring all children develop healthy racial identity. The research is clear. Babies as young as 3 months old can discriminate faces based on skin color. So that's in the image there. As children get older, they begin assigning stereotypes and biases to people based on racial features. And by age 5, children display a pro-white bias and make judgments based on race, culture, and ethnicity. Children are learning about differences from the moment they are born, and our silence allows those stereotypes to fester. Children need the adults in their lives to point out biases, challenge misconceptions, and give them appropriate language to talk about identity. This framework is filled with resources for engaging in this important work with young children. Okay, so now I want to pause here and give you a chance to reflect. I'm going to share a question that's going to pop up on the screen. Okay, so one question I always ask attendees at my keynotes and workshop is, what is your first memory of race? And I want you to think back as young as you can remember. Did you say something? If so, what response did you receive? What do you remember feeling at the time of the incident? Did someone else say something? What response did they receive? So Dr. Tatum included this exercise in her book, and I've been using it ever since. And one thing I've learned is that most people experience shame, silence, and guilt as their first earliest memory of talking about race, culture, ethnicity. And so and that matters, right? Because if you learn at an early age that we shouldn't talk about race, how comfortable are you responding to a child who called another child dirty because their skin is brown? And if you had a different experience, how does that impact your ability to foster healthy racial identity development now? So one participant in one of my sessions said her experience was completely different. She didn't remember what the person said, but she remembered being with her mom when she was young, probably under the age of 10. They were at like a gathering of people they didn't really know really well, like other adults and stuff. And some adult made a racist comment. And she doesn't remember what the comment was because she never really fully heard it. But what she remembers is her mom's response. And her mom telling that person directly, do not ever speak like that in front of my child. We do not talk like that. And that stayed with her. And here she is then in my session, learning more about racial identity development and how to be anti-racist in early child education. So it matters, right? That first memory is important. And it's going to impact your ability, right? Because this is what this is all about. If you have a responsibility to support children's healthy identity development, which I think you do, and I hope you accept, but you can't do that if you've not examined your own identity development. And it's okay if you have had an unhealthy or negative racial identity development, because I did, right? And I've made it past that and through that into another place. All right, so now I'm going to check the comments for a second, give you a chance to go ahead and reply there if you're watching live. If you're not watching live, not to worry. When you watch this recording on my YouTube page, you can go ahead and enter your thoughts in the comments, and and we can go from there. I will respond. But I would like to share my first memory with you because I think it's important. So I grew up in New Jersey, born in Panama, grew up in New Jersey. Go Panama, they're playing right now in the World Cup. I grew up in New Jersey, and my mom, I was 5 years old. I remember because I was in kindergarten, and I remember being in school, and it must have been in February around President's Day weekend, because our instruction was to draw a picture of our favorite president. And I was minding my Black business, drawing my picture, when another white boy asked who had the brown crayon, and I said, I did. So he came over and asked for the crayon, and he looked at my picture and he said, what are you doing? Why is that? What are you doing? And I something like that. And I said, I'm drawing a picture of Thomas Jefferson. And he's like, why is he brown? And I was like, why is he not brown? And he's like, we've never had a Black president and we never will. Right. So this was 5 years old, probably like 1983. So I go home and I ask my mother, and she goes, yeah, again, she's from Panama. She's like, yeah, I don't know what's up with this country, but they've never had a Black president or a female president. And that was it. She really couldn't give me any more background on that. But it stayed with me. And as I started doing this exercise and thinking about my memory, a lot of things resurfaced, right, when I reflect on it. One, why did I think, of all people, of all presidents, Thomas Jefferson was Black? Well, because I watched the Jeffersons, and George Jefferson was Black. So little me, why wouldn't I not think that he was Black, right? So I didn't have any conception that a president could not be Black. I didn't have an conception of racism and discrimination, right? His name was Thomas Jefferson. George Jefferson was one of my favorite sitcoms to watch with my mother, my stepdad. So yeah, I thought he was Black. That's a logical conclusion. But think about what this little boy knew at his age. He knew, one, that it was wrong because he could not be Black because no president had been Black. And he knew that as a young white boy because he had been socialized into racial superiority, right? To seeing whiteness as the norm, as the default, as the best. And he just knows this is a fact, right? He knows that we've never had a Black president. I'd love to find him now after the Obama years and be like, so little boy, how are you feeling? But anyway, he's a grown man now. Needless to say, and he didn't know at the time he was correct, right? So that's my story, and it impacts a lot. And again, I didn't have the understanding of race and racism. I was being socialized in that moment to accept certain things and limitations about what it meant to be Black. But also my mother didn't know because she's not Black American, and she could not provide that support for me. So, and I don't remember if I don't even think the teacher found out. I don't think she knew, to be honestly. I told my mom, I don't think she did. I think that's a conversation that happened between children that the teacher wasn't even aware of. And that happens a lot, right? We think it doesn't. We think kids don't talk about race and racism. But when researchers like myself go into classrooms, they find a very different story because they're listening to children and they're hearing things that teachers don't always hear, right? So, all right. That was my story. I hope to read about yours in the comments. Let me just check. Not yet, no comments, but if you want to add it there, you can send me an email, denisha@djonesconsultant.com. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about your first memories of race. All right, so now let's apply the 4-part framework. That's fine. There we go. Okay, let's apply the 4-part framework to this value. And so you can see the framework up there, although that's not my favorite image, it's okay. So the first step is to name your value. How does celebrating and affirming diversity guide your commitment to high quality early childhood education and care for all children? So for me, high quality means we focus on optimal whole child development. If we're trained to see identity development as a developmental domain, then we would recognize that just like with cognitive, language, social, emotional, and physical development, we must actively support children's healthy identity development. I believe identity development must be included in our understanding of the developmental domains of childhood. Some may argue, well, it's kind of included in social and emotional, but I would say, argue it deserves its own space, right? It deserves its own focus. All right, so that's step 1, name your value. Step 2 is to conduct an alignment audit. What policies prohibit you from enacting this value? What behaviors show you are out of alignment? What is an early indicator or warning sign that you're drifting? Here's some of the practices and policies that I see that prevent alignment with this value. Dismissing or ignoring children's racial learning, insisting that you're just dismissing it outright, or insisting that you don't see color and all children are the same, censoring books that talk about diversity, being afraid of being called woke for talking with children about diversity, banning teachers from talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, teaching the truth about our history. All of those I've seen and I still see. And the early warning sign that you're drifting when you say, I know this is important, but X is more important right now. This is what I want you to pay attention to. Because when this happens, you need to recognize how you are being pulled from something you believe in because of pressure to focus on something else, right? So I hear this all the time. We have a literacy crisis. We don't really want to focus on race and diversity issues right now, right? Or, we were doing Black Lives Matter schoolwork and a teacher said, we've got a lot of immigrant students coming in right now. Now's not the time to focus on Black Lives Matter. And I assure you it is, because immigrants are the number one group susceptible to anti-Blackness, right? Because part of the draw to coming into this country and being accepted is to take on anti-Blackness, right? So they need this work as much as anyone else. But again, the idea is that you believe in this, but you're being pulled away into something else. Remember, if we treat identity development like a developmental domain, we can't push it aside to focus on math, right? We wouldn't do that for language development or cognitive development, right? Because we know those are integrated. So if you find yourself pulling away from identity development to focus on academics, that's how you know you're not aligned with this value. All right, third, frame the message. Why does this value matter? This is your elevator speech. Here's mine. The early years are a crucial time for a child's development, meaning early childhood educators are responsible for supporting the whole child. In addition to supporting a young child's physical, cognitive, language, and social and emotional development, early childhood teachers and caregivers must support healthy identity development. Healthy identity development is crucial to ensuring all children have the self-confidence required for leading healthy, fulfilling lives. Identity formation in the early years happens in stages through interactions with families, schools, communities, and society. And finally, so that's it, short and sweet, right? Okay, so finally, the fourth step is to advocate for your value. How can you advocate for this value in your personal and professional life? I advocate for this value by offering workshops, trainings on my framework for affirming healthy identity in the early years. I support early childhood educators by learning about social identities and socialization and how to create an environment that affirms children's race, culture, and ethnicity. And I call out racism and anti-Blackness whenever I see it, and even if it makes people mad, and even if it's not what they want to talk about, the way I started tonight's live. I've been struggling to post even on social media about the death of that young boy, but I would not start this conversation without it, because I advocate for this value by making this link, even if other people don't want to see it. And I hold space, right, like I just did, to honor the victims of a racist anti-Black society. All right, well, I hope you will embrace this value to affirm and celebrate diversity as a virtual asset, as a vital asset in the lives of young children. Diversity is not divisive unless you make it divisive. Diversity is beautiful if you recognize the beauty in difference. Diversity is exciting if you remain open to learning about people who are different from you. Diversity is what makes America great, if you refuse to let others scare you into believing something else. If this discussion sparked an interest in you, I invite you to join my community, Free to Teach equals Liberated to Learn. You can scan the cute green QR code at the top of your screen to join for free. All right, and then I just realized I want to do something, and okay, hold on. I'm going to play a sneak peek for the next one, but I didn't load it on here. Okay. So next week, Wednesday, next live discussion. I don't want to say too much because it's going to pop up here in a minute. I have a little video for you to watch. And where did they go? Okay, here we go. Bear with me there. Nope, did I not? I downloaded it. Where is it? There it is. Yeah, okay, here we go. It's popping up, and I'm going to share it now. Next week, Wednesday, June 24th at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight, I'm hosting my next live in my series, Embracing Early Childhood Education and Care Values as Resistance. Up next is Early Childhood Education and Care Value number 7, supporting children's development through caring, meaningful relationships with families and caregivers. What if the most important thing you do as an early childhood educator has nothing to do with curriculum? Research is unambiguous on this point. The quality of relationships between educators and children, between programs and families, between caregivers and the communities they serve is the single most powerful factor in early childhood outcomes. Not the curriculum, not the assessment tool, not the literacy program, the relationship. And yet, professional development, policy mandates, and program evaluations continue to prioritize everything but relationships. Educators are trained to deliver content, manage behaviors, and document progress, while the relational work that actually drives development is treated as instinct rather than craft. Meaningful relationships with families and caregivers are not peripheral to early childhood practice. They are the practice. Join me for a live discussion on how to embrace this value as a form of resistance. See you next Wednesday at 7 p.m. All right, folks, that's going to do it for today. So I want to thank you for all that you do to protect childhood and care for children, and I hope to see you next week at our next live discussion.